So I am descending even further into the Duneverse, and I have just finished reading the third book in the series, Children of Dune. I was very curious about where this one was going to go because we kind of wrapped up the Paul Atreides story in the last book, and this one, of course, is much longer than Dune Messiah. This one is almost as long as the first one. The first one's about 600 pages. This was about 500. So it took me almost a full month to get through this, but mostly because I was working on a bunch of other videos and stuff in the meantime as well. It says nothing about the quality of the book because I actually think I like this one more than Messiah, but that's just because there's so much more going on. Whereas Messiah was very, to the point. It was about 300 pages. It was very direct. It was very much about Paul, and it very much felt like a continuation of the first Dune, as well as kind of an expanded epilogue to that story, which I really, really enjoyed, particularly the final third of Dune Messiah, where everything just starts happening at once, and it just gets really, really cool. Really loved the ending of that book. So going into Children of Dune, I knew we were going to have newer protagonists with Paul's children. We have Leto Atreides and Ghanima, if I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me with the pronunciation. I can't even pronounce words that are in actual English, so forgive me for the words in Dune. It's a miracle I can pronounce, Kwisatz Haderach and Lisa Nagaib. But let's move on from there. I think that this book is pretty much on the same level as the original. I don't like it quite as much, but I think the story structure itself and the fact that it feels like an epic narrative is very, very much in tune with the original book. We are essentially just doing the next line in the Atreides family, focusing on Paul's children, but it feels like their story in the exact same way that it felt like Paul's story in the first book. And I was very curious to wonder if Paul was still going to be alive or not, because he just kind of wanders out into the desert and you don't really know what happened to him. So I was very curious if Paul was going to show up in this book. And this is going to be filled with spoilers because it's kind of hard to talk about this book without getting into spoilers. But I guess the bare bones storyline before I get into specifics of spoilers is this takes place 9 years after Dune Messiah and the twins that Paul and Chani had. Chani passed away. Paul wandered into the desert. So now we have these two twins that don't have their actual parents around. Were raised by the Princess Arulan, however you pronounce her name, and were raised by Alia, which was Paul's sister, and she has a ton of crazy stuff going on in this book that I'll get to in a moment. And similar to Alia, but far beyond them, both of the children of Dune have all of the past memories and understanding and knowledge of all of their ancestors just kind of immediately from an early age. And sometimes while reading this, I kind of forgot that they're supposed to be like 9 years old, but they have all of these memories and knowledge from all the past, Atreides and Harkonnen and every part of their bloodline, that they are far more intelligent than most of the people that they interact with. And there's plenty of times, similar to how in Messiah, I thought it was funny that Alia had these moments where she's really, really smart, but she's also like becoming a teenager. So she has these teenage kind of moments. With Leto and Ghanima, they are kind of beyond that in a way where they don't even feel or act like children whatsoever. And it kind of starts this bit of like a sense of superiority I feel like they have about everybody else around them. And in a way, they're not wrong because they know what everyone else around them thinks or came from, at least the people that they have memories from. And they also continuously have visions of the future and potential future. So they are far beyond the capabilities of anybody else that's around them. And, there are kind of conspiracies that are happening at the moment now that Paul is no longer in power and Alia has kind of taken up the reins. There are a lot of changes happening on Arrakis where even the environment is changing. They started this sort of in Dune Messiah. They were talking about it a little bit, I think. But here it kind of comes to fruition where sort of the ecology, is that the right word I'm looking for? The weather, like everything on the planet is beginning to change. And even the worms themselves are beginning to become lesser and lesser, leading towards, won't happen for another like 100 years or so, couple hundred years, but leading towards extinction. And if that happens and spice goes away, that's very bad. So in the story, Leto and Ganima kind of go on their own adventure together at first and then separated. And also it delves into a lot of things that are happening with the other characters, particularly Alia, and Jessica comes back into the story. She has a ton of stuff to do here, as well as one of the children of the previous emperor who wants to have control back, that wants the throne back, essentially. And then you also have characters like Duncan Idaho and Stilgar and Gurney, and you have all those characters, and they all have a bunch of stuff going on with them too. And essentially what you're getting at is all of the things that have been set in motion by all of these previous generations are here and established, but then you have these two children that decide they're going to do something completely different, and nobody is going to stop them, right? So they just have this directive, this drive in order to create something that is called, or to go and create something that is called the golden path of this vision that they see, while all of this corruption is already happening and everybody is sort of plotting and scheming against each other. That's kind of a big part of the first book, where like the Baron and everybody had all these plots and ideas of how to take things over. So here you have, you know, things going on with Alia that are pretty suspicious, as well as you have the Emperor's son that wants control of the throne again. You have the children doing their own thing. You have people, even like Stilgar, who becomes very, very suspicious of things that are going on. You have people like Duncan Idaho, who, you know, shows way more compassion and emotion in this book than you would think a Mentent would have, right? That he was kind of brought back and gifted to Paul, and then had all of his memories brought back. And so now he's with Alia, but he's also got a lot of confliction within himself too. So it's sort of like schemes within schemes, plans within plans, you know, all vying for what is going to become of the future of Arrakis now that Paul is gone, now that there's a bunch of corruption within the leadership, and with all of these characters having their own specific motives, while Arrakis itself is in the midst of a gigantic change and about to, well, you know, if things are not changed, lose one of their ultimate resources. You know, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's a commentary on us not taking care of our planet and just watching it slowly deteriorate. I don't know, but I liked it. But now I gotta get into spoilers, because this book gets nuts, and there's a lot of stuff in here I like. I'm gonna start with my dislikes, because I have a very, very small dislike of this book, but otherwise I really, really enjoyed it. My biggest dislike is that sometime towards the middle during Leto's journey, I felt like the book was a little bit slow, just in the sense of I kind of knew where it was ultimately heading, but he has a lot of pit stops to make. And I guess, you know, you are doing a journey of our main character, and he needs to go through these trials and tribulations and everything. But there was sometimes where I just felt like it was kind of dragging a little bit during those moments. And but once it got to the actual the payoff of his journey, I think it all made it worthwhile. And I feel like this is the kind of review where it would be easier to go into specifics if I just go character by character rather than going through points in the story, because it constantly shifts perspectives. And this is the way the first Dune book was written too. Like, it would go from Paul's perspective and then back to the Baron and then to another character and yada yada, back and forth. And that's kind of the same way it was done here. So I'll just go kind of character by character and talk about the main points that I want to talk about. This is all off the cuff, by the way. I didn't even write down notes this time, so I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. So sorry about that if it's a little disorganized and the structure's not that great. But since it's called Children of Dune, let's talk about the Children of Dune. I loved Leto Atreides, okay? And this guy got more and more unhinged as the series went on, but in the best possible way, because he's so smart, he's so intelligent, he's so resourceful, and he is just willing to do whatever it takes to reach the golden path. So the golden path is this vision he saw to bring peace to people, to humanity, to the universe for potentially thousands of years, with many sacrifices that would need to be made along the way. So basically you're taking what Paul did, but timesing it by like 1,000. Like, Paul created this, you know, this war, this jihad that, you know, killed a lot of people. You know, war happened, and you know, it changed the way that things are done within this universe. But the golden path is taking that and taking it that next step further. And it was a step that Paul saw and did not want to take. And that was I think, if I understand it correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that was part of his inspiration to go into the desert at the end of the last book and kind of try to subtly, take down what he had established, or at least let it fizzle out. Like, we're not going to go down this path. This is not something that I'm going to do. Leto sees the same path that Paul saw, and he's like, fuck it, let's do it. And it's interesting because it's hard to grasp, or at least it was for me, because part of it seems like Leto actually thinks that this will bring peace and this will be a good thing to have happen ultimately. Like, the ends will justify the means. But the other part, I really feel this, like, ego-driven, compulsion of, I must be the one. Like, it has to be me. Like, I don't know how quite to describe it. Like, I kept thinking of that quote of, like, I am burdened with glorious purpose. I think that's a quote from Loki in one of the Avenger movies. But, like, I just felt that vibe from Leto. I felt like I am burdened with, I have glorious purpose. Like, it's something I have to do. And it made me really love the character in many ways, because there is that duality to him. And like with all the characters in Dune, there's really no good guys and bad guys. It's all about people making decisions at particular times. And sometimes those decisions have a ripple effect that, can cause atrocities. Sometimes good can come out of it. Good can come out of bad decisions. Bad can come out of good decisions. And it's all a matter of where the character's at the time. And those are my favorite kinds of stories, where you have ambiguity with the characters and you don't just have this is a good guy and this is a bad guy. I like those stories too. Those can work, but I much, much prefer stories that have that ambiguity, where you can at least understand what a character is going through. And even if they make the worst decisions possible, or they start doing horrible things, you can at least understand them as the story unfolds. And from a certain point of view, you get them, right? And I think that, Dune, as the original book, is like a parallel for real wars that have happened, in history, and things that we repeat, and how we look up to either, governments or religions, or like the danger of blending those two together. I think that it makes sense, because most of history, even though history books will write it as good guys and bad guys, when you take a step back and you look at both sides, there's usually valid points on both sides, and it's like, we can't come to any kind of agreement. And then when you start throwing in these higher ideologies, and particularly religion, in there too, well, then it's just there's no way we're ever going to find common ground, and it just becomes chaos. And that'll kind of lead into the preacher character, and kind of trying to take the Messiah away from Paul Atreides, the Messiah label away from Paul Atreides. But so Leto and Ghanima decide that they are going to create this golden path at whatever it costs. So they go out into the desert themselves, because that's where the path is leading them. They have to find this kind of forgotten city of Jakurutu, or whatever it was called. And what I liked about this too is that there is actually an assassin after the twins, but it's not a human. It's actually two tigers. There's like these two, it's like a specific type of tiger. I think it's just fake to this universe. But I love how they explain that these tigers were specifically trained to murder children and then sent out after the twins, who are, of course, like 9 years old physically, but mentally they're have all the memories or whatever. So I just love how there's these two tigers just kind of roaming the desert, just going after children that have been trained to specifically murder children. And I feel like if I owned some tigers, you don't want kids in your yard, so like I would probably do the same thing. Really cool sequence. And there's an attack that happens. Ghanima gets injured, but she survives, and they do manage to kill both of the tigers. But I like the whole tiger sequence. I thought that was cool. I like seeing different creatures in this universe. We have the sandworms, which are awesome, but I like seeing stuff like that too. Like, I liked in the last one getting more of the guild navigators and their weird mutation, and the shapeshifter and stuff. And now we get like these tigers. So I like that it's expanding a little bit to see a little bit more of the mythology of other things that can exist in this universe. And at that point, Leto and Ghanima split up, and Ghanima goes back to the throne. And Leto goes out, and Ghanima is able to convince herself that she believes that Leto was killed by the tiger so that nobody can get information out of her, which I thought that was interesting too. But back here is where the scariest thing is happening. And I love this idea. I thought this was great. So Alia, Paul's sister, she had all of that thrown on her before she was born, where she got all the memories of her past lineage and stuff. And so she came out of the womb having all these personalities before she was even able to develop her own personality, which is similar to the twins, but, you know, she was first. However, so they do this really interesting thing where she has, she looks into like the memories or the personalities of her previous ancestors. And one of them is, of course, the Baron, who actually she killed when she was 2 years old. And the Baron from the first book, basically begins to possess her. So it's interesting because it's not like it's the actual ghost or spirits of the Baron, right? It's just one of the many memories that she has. But how I looked at this creatively was that not only did she kill the Baron, so there's that extra connection there that she doesn't have with any of the other personalities, but also the Baron's personality was so powerful, was so strong, was so determined, was so single-minded. Like, I loved reading the Baron in the first book. He was actually my favorite part to read because I loved all of the conspiracy and like ideas of how he'll get one over on everybody, and how he believed himself to be the smartest person in the room at all times, and he was always conniving and scheming and stuff, and he had a very strong personality. And apparently it's so powerful that it begins to actually take over Alia. She starts to have back and forth conversations with the Baron, and there's even times where the Baron begins to take a little bit of like a manipulative control. And it's so weird to think about because it's like, it's not literally the Baron, but it's the past memory of the Baron that is taking over her mind. And I think because she had that connection, because she actually was the one that killed him, maybe there's that sense of I mean, he was an evil person, so it's like, you know, is a sense of guilt, but like it was just some kind of connection that I felt like they had that led to more of the precedence as to why he would take over her mind, or why she would allow him to take over her mind. And people are subtly picking up on this as time goes on, and it's introduced fairly early in the book. They introduced the whole concept of the Baron taking over her mind, but it's not really it's not really like put into like full focus until the very end. But you have all of these characters that are picking up on this as time goes on, especially Jessica, who is back. And it talks about one of the reasons, because she wasn't in Messiah, it talks about one of the reasons she wasn't was because she couldn't face Alia, because she sensed this abomination about her, and she was absolutely right. As Jessica was one of the smartest characters in Dune, she's still one of the smartest characters in this book, although there are times where she gets one over on her. But anyways, yeah, so people start to sense this as time goes on, and so does Duncan Idaho. And this was the saddest part, because he really likes this girl. Like, he really likes Alia, right? And with Paul gone, he has the loyalty to the Atreides to begin with. But he also, like, a big part of Dune Messiah, the last book, was building up their relationship. Like, it was building up Duncan Idaho as a character, and how he was this Gola that was, you know, brought back, and then he's, you know, recovered his memories, fell in love with Alia. It was a whole thing. It was like, other than Paul's story, that was like the main story of the last book. So he sees all this happen to her, and he just can't take it. He starts getting super depressed, and he's like crying and stuff, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And it's just like, it was really, really heartbreaking to see. And of course, you know, it leads to him making a lot of crazy decisions and wondering about where his loyalties lie and everything. And I was very, very shocked to see, not only does he get killed in this book, but it's Stilgar that kills him. But he also does it to help lead everybody against Alia. And so, like, he does make the ultimate sacrifice. One, it's sort of like, you know, our relation, like, there's nothing else I can do, but then it's also like, I have to take her down because I understand what's happening to her more than anyone else does. Well, I mean, not more than like Jessica or Paul would or anything, but like, I don't know, it's just a sad moment, man. Like, he literally had his second death here, and You know, I was surprised that it was Stilgar that killed him, but yeah. And the other main character to talk about is the Preacher. Okay, and I was really confused on this one for a while because they make it very obvious that there's a preacher character that comes out, and he's blind, and he's in the desert, and he's rallying people kind of against Alia and the Atreides and stuff. And so, like, they make it very obvious that it's Paul. But, like, it's so obvious that I thought, okay, it's probably a red herring, and it's not actually Paul. But then it is actually Paul. So it's like so obvious that it makes you think that it like can't be Paul. So it works in an opposite way. But then, yeah, it is Paul. And I wasn't really sure how I felt about Paul's portrayal in this book, but ultimately I think I do like it because he basically refers to himself as not Paul Atreides. Like, he basically says to everybody, like, Paul Atreides is dead. You know, he's kind of become somebody else. Not that he hasn't been taken. I know, like, in a book where people are getting taken over by, like, all their personalities and have memories and stuff, it's like, it can get complicated. It is Paul Atreides. It is Paul Atreides. He doesn't have anybody taking over his mind, but he considers Paul Atreides dead. And symbolically, he's trying to kill Paul Atreides, the Messiah. He's trying to, I guess, in a last-ditch effort, if I understand this right, kind of rectify what he's done to the best of his ability, because he has hit the point of no return where too many people have died in his name, but the least of which he can do is try to sway people away from the memory of Paul Atreides, the memory of the Lisan Gaib, and just sort of let it die out. Like, let's not let this happen. You know, he didn't want to go down the golden path, so he's like trying to sway people in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, you have his son Leto that is like, nah, we're doing this. And so Leto goes on this entire adventure, and at one point he's captured by Gurney, who is trying to train him, or, you know, put him through these ordeals to make sure that he's not the abomination one, where really it's Alia. And so there's like a moment with Gurney, and then he escapes Gurney, and then he's with a bunch of other characters. And this is where the point where I was saying, like, it was kind of dragging a little bit. But when it got to the main portion of Leto's journey, where this is going to lead into the next book. So there are these sand trout, which are these tiny, like, little creatures that eventually evolve into the giant sandworms that create the spice on the planet. And without them, then, you know, there's no spice, and then, you know, the resource runs dry, people can't travel through space, and it just becomes like a mess, right? Which you don't want to have happen, but apparently is going to happen, right? Eventually, like, the sandworms will die out. Like, it seems to be inevitable at this point. And in the last book as well, there was a conspiracy to kind of take worms off world to try to put them on other worlds. And I guess that's still kind of going on, although it's not delved into in this story, really. It's just sort of like, yeah, you know, people pay to, like, have a worm or whatever. It's kind of weird. I don't know. I don't really understand that part. But what I do understand is that Leto is fucking nuts. So he finds where the sand trout are, the ones that still exist on this planet. And he, like, allows them to crawl on his body, and they begin to, like, assimilate to his skin. And I don't really understand completely how it works, but how it was explained in the book was really, really cool, where he was just kind of like letting one touch him, and then it crawls. It's like a little worm. It's like a small worm, you know? It's like a baby worm. It's like a tadpole worm. But it crawls up on him, and it, like, starts to assimilate to his skin and, like, absorb his moisture, and, like, he's full of spice, and so they're all about it and everything. And then more join up on him, and then more and more. And you basically just, I feel like he just gets covered in these fucking sand trout, and they just fuse to him, and they create, like, a brand new skin, essentially. And he just sort of, like, doesn't need a still suit anymore. They provide everything the still suit provides, but they become part of him. And I'm just reading this thinking, like, because I've heard, you know, I know ideas of, like, what happens in the next book. So I'm like, this is it. Like, it's going down. And so, yeah, he allows all of these sand trout to cover his entire body. And essentially, it turns him into a fucking superhero. Like he is able to jump like super long distances. He's able to run very fast. It increases his strength. He basically becomes insanely powerful. Like he gets so powerful that, you know, him just running through the sand is like, you know, just like a worm, like, you know, going through the sand, like the amount of speed that he is able to gain. And there's scenes where he's like jumping super high, like hundreds of feet into the air and everything. It's beginning this transformation that is going to take like thousands of years to happen, but it is the way to the golden path. Also, he can control sandworms at this point or make them do his bidding. There's a sandworm that approaches him and he just stops it. He just like basically just with the connectivity he has to the sandworm, it just chooses not to attack him. So this guy is getting so insanely powerful from this sort of this willing transformation. And the thing about it is like it's not just you know, it's not just all benefit because there's no going back. Like now that he started this process, you can't. I'd imagine you can't. I imagine there's no way you can. Maybe, I mean, it's sci-fi. I'm sure they could come up with a way if he wanted to. But, like, the idea that I got in the story is that, like, it's the point of no return. Like, once this transformation starts, like, you can't remove the sand trout. Like, you are fucked. You're no longer going to be a human. Like, your humanity is going to fade away and you're going to become something else. This is just the very beginning of that transformation. So we get to see the early stages of it. And this is where he meets up with Paul. And I love the back and forth that they have where, you know, he's like, he knows right away the preacher is his dad. And instead of being like, Dad, where were you my whole life? You went to go get milk in the desert and you never came back. But maybe if he had, this wouldn't have happened. But that's kind of like, that's the story. It's the idea of consequence. It's the butterfly effect. It's that one thing leads to another. It's that, you know, can these things be avoided? You know, maybe if people have made other choices, then maybe, but that's not what happened. It's like you have to live in the real. You know, and what happened is that Leto is going ahead with the golden path, and Paul tries to say like this is, you know, this is going to be, you know, one word that he uses is stagnation, which I thought was interesting because the whole idea is that it's going to bring peace to the universe for years and years, but that peace is going to be under the rule of an entity that, you know, nobody can disobey. So it's like, is it peace through fear? You know, is it going to halt progress of humanity because everyone has to do things a particular way as opposed to having the free will to figure it out for themselves? You know, there's a lot of interesting questions that can come along with this that I'm sure will be explored more in the next book. But I like how Paul was the one to mention those questions because, you know, he was our main character. You know, he's the main character of the story until this point, until this book where his children kind of take over the lead. So I like that he kind of has the wisdom to say, you know, this is going to cause stagnation. This is not going to be the peace that you think it is, or that you want it to be. So, you know, I like that he was there doing that, but ultimately he can't do anything because Leto is just so powerful and Paul is kind of past his prime at this point. Pretty much the only thing he can do is preach at this point. So he goes back to the main area with them, and Paul gets killed very abruptly, not by Leto, but by just the other priests that work for Alia. Like Alia kind of during the course of this whole book, she becomes the big bad essentially. Well, like I said, there's no good guys or bad guys, but you know, things get worse and worse with her possession as time goes on. So when the preacher returns and she knows that it's Paul also, her minions, her priests, they just knife him down in the street. And it's kind of I kind of liked it though. Like I kind of like there's a part of me that wants more of an impactful death for Paul because he's been our main character for so long. But in a story like Dune, where it's about people making these decisions and how we build somebody up as a prophet, or, you know, how belief can hold such power, you know, we forget sometimes that people are just human. And Paul, although he does have visions of the future, although he is extremely proficient in fighting, although he is a great leader, although all of these things, he's still human. And he was able to be killed in the same way a human can be killed, by just being stabbed. And it kind of puts everything back into perspective. However, it's at a moment that's way too late because now his son Leto has actually literally become more than human. It's like Paul wanted the Atreides, or he wanted, you know, the idea of him as a Messiah and stuff to kind of fizzle out, kind of fade away, to end, you know, but he couldn't kill himself, or he couldn't be killed because he would become even more of a martyr than he already was. So he went into the direction of being this preacher guy. But now that he's like knifed down, it's a reminder to everybody, just like that he's human, but it's too late for it to really matter, because now things will go on and will get worse, with Leto kind of taking over the mantle at a point now where nobody can stop him. And similar to the end of Messiah, the ending of this book goes very fast. Like I think it's just the way that Frank Herbert writes. I think he just writes in a way where he builds up to his climax, and then things just happen like boom, 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 and then the story's over. Like everything happens at once. And it's good when you're reading it, but like it's kind of like, what? Like you turn the page, okay, Paul's dead, fucking Alia's dead, what the hell? You know, just like all within the matter of like 5 or 6 pages. But Alia sacrifices herself because she has this, the Baron's taken over, and she's confronted. Leto comes back. Ganima remembers everything that happened. So Leto and Ganima are there. Jessica's there with Fareda, or what is his name? Sorry, I should have wrote this down before I did the review. The son of the previous emperor. They're all there in the room. And I love how Leto just like breaks down the door. He literally has super strength. Like he's literally a superhero right now. Like he just whips down the door, throws the door. He snaps people's neck in like in like 1 second. Like this guy he's just beyond human at this point. And the Baron starts to take over again in her mind, and she basically throws herself out a window to end her own life, as well as the Baron personality that has taken over. And it's pretty tragic. It's not like just, you know, killing the villain kind of thing. It's more of like you know, she was tormented this whole book. You know, she was tormented, and nobody was really there by her side, and she did the best that she could in her situation. And so like it's done in a way that's kind of like, man, like if only maybe Leto had stayed there and like been able to help her, or if Paul had stayed and been able to help her, but nobody did. And so it had to end that way. And I am upset to lose her character, because I really liked her in the last book, but you know, this is where we're at. So we essentially end with Leto taking the throne. Remember, he's in the body of a 9-year-old this whole time too. Like it's always like hard to remember that. And he essentially takes the throne, ready to begin this metamorphosis that he's going to go through. That's going to take thousands of years. And you know, he's going to have the emperor's son have children with his sister, because he can't have children anymore because he's no longer human. But he's going to like politically marry his own sister. So I guess there's some incest going on, just like not literally, but like implied, to keep the Atreides line going. Actually, interesting, I was going to bring this up earlier with the relationship between the two siblings, is that because they have all the past memories, they have both Paul and Shani's memories, and they have a dynamic that is sometimes very close to being husband and wife. And it's not in like a sexual weird way, but it's like it's more of a way to understand how deep of a bond these two siblings have, how deep of a bond these twins have. Like they are brother and sister, but because of their lineage, they also have a bond that's as strong as husband and wife, not in a weird incest way, but in kind of just like a connectivity between them. So I did think that aspect of it was interesting. So yeah, so it's going to lead to the rule of Leto the Second, or is it Leto the Third? Because Paul had a son in the first book that died as an infant, also named Leto. So if that's Leto the Second that dies and you have another kid, is it you just replace that Leto the Second, not Leto the Third? I don't know. Regardless, Children of Dune was pretty awesome. I really did enjoy it. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as the first, but by the end of it, I think I do like it more than Messiah, just because there's so much more to it. Messiah is very short, where this one had a lot of stuff going on. And it is tragic to finally see the end of Paul. Paul will, of course, well, unless he gets brought back, which I don't know if that's possible, but you know, Duncan got brought back, so you know, maybe. I would assume this is the end of Paul's story. Like this is the end of the trilogy, I guess you would say, the first trilogy. And since we're going to jump ahead, you know, like some thousand years for the next book, I assume that that's kind of gonna function that way, where it's like this was the first half of Dune, and now we're gonna go into the second half. So I'm excited to read the next one, most particularly because I do hear from Dune fans that the next one, God Emperor of Dune, which is such a badass title, is a lot of people's favorite. People say it's either just as good as the first book or their favorite book of the whole series. And to that, especially after reading Children, which I thought was really good, I'm really excited to get to God Emperor of Dune. Like if people are saying that's the best book in the series, I'm like, holy shit, like, all right, I don't know what I'm in for. But yeah, I really did enjoy Children of Dune, and I had a lot of fun with it. It took me a while to read, and again, I don't have any kind of time frame for this videos. I pretty much just try to find time to read when I can, in between making a bunch of other videos. But I will get to it as soon as I can, and hopefully get that review up for you guys. Like I said, I'm going to read through all of the first 6, Frank Herbert Dunes. I bought the collection there, so I plan to read through all of them. So whether it takes me another month or however long it takes me, eventually, yes, I will review God Emperor of Dune next. So let me know what you guys think of Children of Dune down in the comments. What are your favorite things about it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Where do you think it ranks within the rest of the Dune series? And let me know all of your thoughts about it. So thanks for watching this video, guys. Please give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. If you want to support the channel on a deeper level, in the description below, I do have a Patreon, channel memberships, merch store, and all the social media links where you can follow me. I'm most active on Twitter or Instagram if you want to see pictures of my cat. But other than that, guys, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.